Howdy folks, Timber Drifter here. Well, it's the tail end of October. Get to this time of year and start thinking about spooky stories. We all enjoy scaring ourselves a little bit, right? Of course, it's better if you can scare other people. I was thinking about what story I could tell, what story would be worth telling. I've got quite a few of them. I'm not interested in telling stories about things that happen to other people or somebody I know or something like that. The story that comes to mind is something that happened last winter to me. And it's kind of a crazy story. And I've debated about whether I should tell it on here or not. But I think I'll give it a go and see how it looks on the video, and maybe you'll see it. Peterson Aaron with some Yule's Bishop's Move. So I suppose before I get into the story, I should explain that I suffer from insomnia, particularly during the winter. It seems like the less daylight there is, the harder it is for me to go to sleep. And sometimes I'll just sit there all night, just awake, or eventually in a state of something between asleep and awake. It's not that I completely don't sleep, I just may not sleep for 2 or 3 nights, or I might only get an hour or 3 hours of sleep. And it'll go on like that for weeks. And things start to get a little strange with long-term sleep deprivation. Start hearing things, may not be there. Start seeing things at the corners of your eyes. Turn around and look and it's not there. Things that would normally be simple become difficult. So, the other thing is that years ago when I first moved up here to northern Wisconsin, I got really into studying the native people that lived in this area for a long time. Usually called the Chippewa or the Ojibwe or Anishinaabe. Got real interested in how they did things. Lodge building and how they made their birch bark canoes and baskets and bows and arrows, and how they trapped fish and hunted, trapped, all that stuff. But I also got really interested in their stories. I find some of those stories easier to connect with than Western religious tales. But I got to know some native people here quite a few years ago, and actually got to hear some of those stories around a campfire at night, which is a good way to hear them. Some of the recurring characters like Nana Bojo and the Thunderbirds and another one. I just smoked this pipe before I decided to do this video, so it's a little wet. So, knowing that I don't sleep much and I've got a head full of native stories, consider that while I'm telling the story. So, last year it would have been in January, I think, sometime in the depths of January. Last winter was a rough winter. Not just rough with me not sleeping, but it was a rough winter. It was very cold. A lot of sub-zero weather, a lot of snow. More snow than I've ever seen here before. I was calling it the trench life because my trails were just, 3 to 4 foot deep trenches. From the wood pile to the house to the outhouse. And there were a lot of real heavy storms that month. So anyway, somewhere in the depths of January, I was in my little cabin, sitting by the wood stove. It was a hell of a storm kicked up outside. The wind was blowing so hard it was shaking the house. I could hear the trees bending and hitting each other outside, and the snow just bashing against the windows. My house is small. It's a 16-foot octagon. So with all that going on outside there, it was something like being inside of a barrel. I couldn't even hear the radio. So after a while, I turned it off and just sat in the chair and I closed my eyes and tried to go to sleep. But I wasn't quite asleep yet. I was in that place between the two where there's no thoughts happening, but you're still somewhat conscious. And through all of that wind and snow blowing around and trees creaking, and I heard a knock on the door. Now, the likelihood of anyone knocking on my door is 0. My house is at the end of a footpath. Can't see any neighbors from around here. You can't see my place from the road. Nobody comes back here that isn't invited. Certainly no one that wouldn't call first. And certainly no one in the middle of a damn snowstorm after midnight. So when I heard that, I didn't even consider it. And I started to fall asleep. I was kind of going in and out. I'd kind of wake up a little bit, and then I'd almost make it. I'd almost fall asleep, and I'd wake up a little bit again. I was at one of those points when I had almost fallen asleep, and I heard it again. That time I woke up totally, and I looked around, and what the hell was that? I got up and was going to look out the door, and my door is glass, or the bulk of it is a glass pane window with a curtain over it. I got a headlamp on. I walk over and pull the curtain, and all I see is my own face looking back at me because it's shining off the glass, which actually made me jump a little bit. And I clicked the headlamp off and grabbed my big flashlight and stuck it right up against the glass so I could see out and it wouldn't reflect back at me. And all I could see was wind and snow blowing around. So obviously I thought I didn't hear anything knock at the door, and there's no trees that can touch the house on that side. On the back side there's a few branches that can hit the edge of the roof, but it wasn't anything that would make that noise. So although it was a little spooky and I was a little spooked by the storm anyway, I didn't really think about it much. I went and stoked the wood stove and sat back down. It was probably another 3 or 4 minutes, maybe longer. I was starting to think I wasn't going to get to sleep that night at all. And I heard it again. And that time I kind of jumped and I thought, shit, what was that? And I got to the door really quick and pulled the curtain aside and stuck the flashlight up against the glass and turned it on, and nothing there. Just snow and wind, just snow whipping past the door in sheets. But I knew what I'd heard. I was awake, only about 6 foot away from the door, and I heard that light knock on there. Whatever's going on, somebody's messing with me. Somebody's standing around the side of the house, reaching over and knocking, because from the door I can't see around the sides. I thought there isn't anyone who would be messing with me in a snowstorm, you know. Like nobody who would pull a prank on me would do it then. I just had that kind of eerie feeling, you know, the hair standing up on the back of my neck. Next to my door, I keep a shotgun, double barrel, 12 gauge. I keep the right barrel loaded with a 3-inch slug and the left barrel loaded with a 3-inch Magnum buckshot. That's for bears. Several times I've had bears looking right in my door at me, or step out in the yard and there's one right there. But it's also nice when you live out of range of the law enforcement. At least they couldn't, even if I could get a call out, they couldn't have got here quick, even on a good day. It's nice to have a little firepower. So anyway, I open the door and my door opens in, and then I'm not just going to stick my head out for whoever's standing out there. And I crouch down lower than waist level and shone the flashlight out that way and this way. There wasn't anybody there. And then I started getting real nervous. There wasn't any reason for that knock on the door, and there wasn't anyone outside. There wasn't anywhere anyone could even be hiding. I just had a strange feeling coming over me. I don't know if you've ever been looked at by a big predator. That's what it felt like. It's hard to describe. But I thought I better check it out anyway. So, turned my headlamp on all the way, grabbed my big flashlight, grabbed my shotgun, held under my arm like that. I walked outside and I figured I'd just show the light around my clearing, which is about 30 yards, and just satisfy myself that there wasn't anyone out there or anything out there. Well, it was the kind of dark out that just swallowed the light, just ate it. If it had been a full moon, you wouldn't have been able to see any light out there with the storm and the snow blowing around, reflecting my light back at me from my flashlights. So I couldn't really see very far. And I stepped a few steps out into the yard, probably 10 foot from the door. And that eerie feeling was really coming over me. And I was looking at the end of the clearing. I almost thought I saw something move over there, but with all the snow blowing around, it's hard to tell. And right then I heard a kind of a crazy laughter that was almost immediately swallowed by the sound of the wind. And I felt like I was being drawn out, like whatever knocked on the door and whatever made that laughter at the end of the clearing in the snow wanted me to follow them. And I hollered, "Who's out there?" Nothing but the wind. I guess I had two things going on in my mind at that moment. I had the rational mind that's seeing what it's seeing and hearing what it's hearing and calculating angles and distances and what it ought to do about things. And there's that voice in the back of the head that was telling me, number one, this is not happening. There's no way this is happening. And if it is happening, if this was a horror movie, this is the part where you get killed because you went outside to look around. Yeah, that's probably a good observation. I kind of kept the shotgun in front of me and sort of backed back toward the house and went in the door and slammed the door and locked it. Like a scared kid running out of a basement. Now this happened, It was happening. There wasn't any doubting it. Now, whatever is going on here, it's not a joke. That laughter didn't sound like anything I've heard come out of a person, but it sounded like laughter. And a story came back to me that I'd heard about what the natives in this area and further north call a wendigo. And the way that I heard the story was in the depths of winter, in the starving times when people are running out of food and game gets scarce. The wendigo comes down out of the north and lures people out of their lodges in a snowstorm by singing or laughing. It can mimic human voices. And then they eat them. There's more to it than that, but that's all that's necessary to know for this part of the story. So, not that I necessarily believe that, but at the time, that was what came to mind. So I slipped a pistol in my waistband and a Bowie knife on the other side. Sat down in the chair with the shotgun and a pipe to wait out the night. And I didn't know if you can fight a spiritual being with steel and lead. But be damned, I was going to give it a go if it came to it. But nothing happened. I sat there for hours and listened to the storm blow away and break down. And and the quiet come in, and quiet was almost worse than the storm because then I could hear everything. There wasn't anything to distract me, and there wasn't anything there. So I don't know. The next morning, put on my snowshoes and did a couple loops around. There weren't any tracks at all anywhere. It was all fresh snow. So I don't know, maybe it was a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. Maybe it was carbon monoxide poisoning. Maybe it was who knows what. Maybe that laughter was an owl or a fox making their crazy noises, but it didn't sound like either one of those things. My rational mind cannot accept the idea that it may have been a malevolent spirit being. But there was something there. Whatever happened that night, I experienced it. It wasn't a dream. So, take care. Go outside.